When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and know that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of this wide world I stand alone and think, to love and fame, to nothingness to sink.
Okay. So, Ryan, I think you started off too high.
Yeah.
In your voice. You really have to just get it in your head that first register.
Yeah. I could hear it as I was going, and I would try to get back after, say, a suspension to try to... but yeah, I guess I still...
Also, there weren't enough shifts in register. The note that you started on, you stayed on pretty much the whole time. There was one good intervallic thing that you did. Huge cloudy symbols. That was nice, but most of it was pretty much. And then of the wide world, I stand alone and think was more stressed than inflected. So what's happening, Brian, is that instead of expressing the thoughts, you're giving phrases and words. And so you're not really communicating the subtext of this poem. You're on the text itself, and you're very sincere. But it's very hard to understand what you're saying because I'm not getting that engine that's pushing the subtext. There's really nothing pushing that. It's all very it's devoid of any subtext at all. And that has to come from you, from your understanding of the poem and what it means to you and why you want to express it. Right now, I don't do any of that. Try it again.
Okay.
Start off lower. That'll help.
Yeah. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high pot...
Hold on. That was a good start. But then you could have shifted lower. On the second line, when I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now I'm getting some tension. Now I'm understanding. I'm getting a journey instead of a recitation. That was a good start. Try it again.
When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like...
Hold on. When I have fears before my pen, before high-piled... It's the same note you're starting on every one of these lines. You have to make a conscious choice to do something different. Otherwise, it really does sound like reciting.
Mm-hmm.
Try it again. Don't, don't worry that you're afraid that we won't understand it. We will. As long as you're expressing it as it, you know, as you understand it, and as your passion allows you to express it.
Yeah. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night-starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance.
Hold on. The first quatrain was acceptable. But then you started the second quatrain in the same place that you started at the beginning of the first. And so I'm hearing just a very, very narrow range from your voice.
Yeah.
When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen, before high piled books, hold like rich garner, when I behold. So, that's not the way we talk. That's not the way you talk in real life. So, you know, what's needed is to bring a heightened sense of your real voice in all of its range. You know, you can't live in 3-4 notes. I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in territory hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night-starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. I mean, stay in your first register, if anything. Right now, you're staying right at the top of your first register, and I think going into your second register. I want you to stay right at the bottom of the first register until emotionally you have to get out of that. And again, what made it acceptable was, at least the first quatrain, why it didn't stop you, was because there was an engine pushing. There was a subtext that you were giving me, and then you lost it. Because your mind is saying, well, what the fuck, why am I thinking? I'm just going to be saying it in the same old goddamn same register, so why do I have to think? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night-starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and know that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink.
Okay, so you're rushing it. You're rushing it. It's like you don't want to lose the thread of the thoughts as they unfold. So you're hoping that if you rush it, then we won't lose the thread, or you won't lose the thread of the thoughts as they unfold. But you have to keep in mind that you can do this. When I say slower, I mean give the sense to settle in, especially in your own mind, before you go on. This is one of the things that came to me when I was doing this last project in Tucson. I was reading from the script, and so I had marked all the possible phrasing places that made sense. And I found that as long as I kept to those phrasing points, I was fine. When I started skipping some and or not taking the breaths that I had chosen to do, I found that it was less effective. Also, when I felt myself getting out of my first register unnecessarily, just arbitrarily, I caught myself coming back to my first register and everything was fine. My mind was settled down again. I was concentrated again. And so, when I was preparing, this is something that was part of the preparation. Not just doing the technical work, but forcing myself. And when I skipped a spot, I went back. I did it over with until that was ingrained in me as a motor memory thing. And so this has to be ingrained, Brian. It just, when you hear yourself out of your first register, your mind has to automatically tell you, get back into your first register. Until, emotionally, sense-wise, it makes sense to go out of it. And not by stress, but by inflection. Try it again. Now remember, suspensions allow you to take your time. They allow you to develop the thought to its utmost sense. When you rush, you narrow the sense of the poem. We don't really, we're either getting just pretty words or pretty phrases, or we're not getting a subtext that's really driving the text. And you have to stay on that subtext. You can't do it just for 4 lines. You have to do it all the way through. So, take a breath when you need a breath. Make a suspension when you need a suspension. So that you don't have to keep rushing. You don't feel like you have to keep talking. And I found found, because I was reading in this project, I found that I was walking up and down stage. If I hadn't had the text in my hand, it was pretty staged. But I was reading it. So I found that as long as I was doing my suspensions correctly and sticking to them, that if I lost my place, I could still hold the audience until I found it again.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, try that. Just the way you said, oh yeah. Start right there in your voice, in your register.
Oh, yeah. When I have fears that I may cease to be before my...
That I may cease to be. Remember, you're taking them on a thought process. When I have fears, breath, that I may cease to be, let us give us time to deal with that. I have fears that I might die. That should hold any audience.
Yeah.
When I have fears that I might die, I shit my pants every day. Whatever, you know?
Yeah.
We'll wait. If it's done correctly. If it's given by an intention, which is in the subtext. Okay, here we go.
When I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has...
Wait a minute. Cease to be has to mean something to you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's causing this whole crisis right now. You're dealing with a crisis. And so cease to be has to be much more important than just throwing it out like that. When I have fears that I might die, well then, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I wonder, well, what if I can do this, or ever do that, or ever do that, and then all shit comes over with. Right?
Yeah.
Invested.
When I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in carrot-tree hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and know that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of this wide world I stand alone and think, to love and fame, to nothingness to sink.
Very good. Very, very good. A totally different quality than what you were doing before. And it was working on you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
It was working on you as you were going. The last thing you want in any kind of performance is the brain shut off. You don't want to see an instrumentalist shut off their brain and just play the notes. You damn well don't want to see an actor do that. So what you allowed yourself to do was to experience it again and give us that experience as it was unfolding. So literally, you're the performer and the audience. That's where you have to get to. tells the performer, I don't believe a fucking thing you're saying. You hear it. Why are you doing it? And you adjust immediately.
Mm.
Your brain starts to throw tomatoes at the performer on the stage, and then you adjust because there's something false about it. So you have to train your brain to never, ever, ever give in to anything false, anything that is not true. So, even though I could say technically there could have been more vocal shifts, what drove it was the subtext that you stayed on. And the fact that it was working on you. And you know this well enough that you could express what the subtext means to you. Not in some arbitrary, this means that, I like flowers or whatever. Something shallow like that, but there was something deep. There's a deep understanding of this sonnet that means something to you, and you understand it. You understand the truthfulness of it as Keats intended. So you're not going off on some tangent that's satisfying to you in some, in some personalized way that has nothing to do with what Keats had in mind. Try it again. Same thing. It was much more fun. You know what? I forgot. It seemed so much shorter the way you did it before.
Hmm.
So much shorter. But the time was so compressed that when it was over with that, I looked at the page and, oh shit, that's the end of it.
Hmm.
Try it again.
When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books and charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and know that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of this wide world I stand alone, and think, to love and fame to nothingness to sink.
But don't throw away that last line.
I guess what happened was I was too looking over my own shoulder the whole time. So when I got to the end, I know I hadn't, it wasn't as truthful as the one before for me. So I knew that. I was sort of disappointed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, the cadence is always important.
Yeah.
Always, the aftertaste is so important, so you can't throw it away.
Mm.
What you must not do, and I thought you did somewhat this last go through, Brian, was force something onto your performance that wasn't ready, that wasn't there. And so you were like sort of pressing to get an effect.
Yeah.
And the thing is, with great material like this, you don't have to do that. It will do it if you will just relax and allow it to work on you as you begin. What greater way to begin something that's going to work on you than to that first line? When I have fears that I may seek to be. Before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain before high-piled books in territory hold like rich garners. Use that, rich garners, the full ripened grain. I mean, that's where they hold the grain, right, during harvest time, in the garner. It's a great metaphor for the mind. On the night's starred face, huge cloudy symbols of a high romance. It's the magic hand of chance. You have to, don't throw that away. The magic hand of chance, you have to convey to us what it means to you. So if you throw it away, then I don't know what it meant to you at all. The creature of an hour has to mean something to you that you can convey to us. Never relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love. These have to mean something to you. You have to convey it to us. Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think the love and fame to nothingness, to sink. Right? So use the phrases, the power of these phrases. Don't throw them away. Use them because they will help you. Don't force it, but they will help you to tune yourself. They'll help you to tune yourself back to the character of the music without actually singing, of course. It'll start to work on you, and so you get more and more in tune instead of forcing something. What I mean in tune is your mind is constantly adjusting the pitch so that you're never flat, you're never sharp. You're never rushing. You're constantly tuning. So even if there's an intervallic beat that you have made a choice with, it can start from here and be with, it doesn't matter, right? You can start in a low G, and if you have an intervallic beat of a fifth, then you go from G to D. G, D. Or if you find yourself here, G, D. It's the interval that matters. And so if you find, okay, I'm a little bit above where I would like to be in my vocal register, then just drop it. Drop it, but keep the intervallic choices that you've made.
Yeah. You transpose them. Yeah, you transpose them.
Yeah, exactly. You transpose it. Want to try it again?
Sure.
Let it work on you. And what you were doing, taking the breath as you need them. Now, you see, what worked for me when I was doing this thing, I have made so many plausible breathing places where, if a person looked at my script, they saw all of these places that I had marked. Well, they would think, you don't need all those breaths. Well, I do because I'm trying to convey something. I'm trying to get the full value of the words, and I don't want to be caught without enough breath to be able to convey that. So these breaths were only occasionally did I skip one place to breathe at another one. Because, and it worked that way also because I found plausible places to take a breath, I never took a breath at an illogical place.
Hmm.
So that's what you have to keep in mind. Where you take the breaths is not as important as is it a logical place to take a breath.
And there may be more. There may be more than one logical or plausible places, and maybe given on a different night you might breathe in a different place depending on.
As long as it's logical.
Yeah.
It's when you start doing arbitrary choices that you often get caught out of breath, and so you have no choice to take a breath. You have to take a breath where you need it, and it might be in a place that's illogical.
Hmm.
That makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
So you always keep to your choices. And if I were you, I would do that with this text. I would go through and mark where you could have plausible breaths. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleamed my teeming brain, before high-piled books. See?
Mm-hmm.
All of those, it says, what that makes sense is, when I have fears that I may cease to be, right?
Yeah.
Illogical.
So there's natural breathing moments in there, and
Yes.
you may choose to use certain ones and not use others, but
Yes.
they're sort of fit in there in a natural way.
Exactly. And so the breaths that you take is really every time you take a breath, you have the power now to move that engine, the engine of the subtext. Every breath you take allows you the power to move that engine. And believe me, these great sonnets, this great work requires a lot of power to move the engine that's built into the subtext of these great sonnets.
Mm.
That's why throwaway lines, there are no throwaway lines. Try to get right.
Yeah.
Have fun with it.
When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books and charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and know that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, to love and fame, to nothingness to sink.
Yes, getting better and better. The couplet at the end still doesn't have that satisfying cadence yet. But that's getting better and better.
Yeah, I think it's just being comfortable enough to, like you said, allow it to work on you and not just giving it the time to almost within while you're going through it. Otherwise, yeah, I guess
that only can happen, Brian, after you have made good technical choices.
Yeah, I guess
after you have
oh, go ahead.
done all the work that allows you to understand the poem in its deepest sense.
Hmm.
So there's the investigation, then there is the organization of the poem as far as technically what do I need to do to convey what I have just investigated, and then there's the application of it. And it never stops, you never stop adding detail.
Hmm.
You're creating a manifold that is always being added onto. Something is always being added onto that gives it more and more richness. Every time you've gone through it, these last 3 times, it's been richer and richer.
Hmm.
It falls apart in the last 2 lines because you haven't found that cadence yet.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I guess part of it is I get to the unreflecting love, and I don't know, I guess at that moment it's working on me the most, and then there's that shift that happens there, and it's, how does it...
Well, you have to get it in your mind. You have to get it in your mind. Is this a good thing? Again, it goes back to what the poem means.
Yeah.
Am I really happier living in sense perception? Or am I joyful at the thought that I have been able to break through the idea of sense perception? I'm living in sense perception.
Mm.
And I think that's what the poem is saying. When I experience all this stuff of wanting to be famous, wanting to be well known, wanting to take everything out of my brain, all the greatness that I have in my brain, and then also have you, instead of creature of an hour, to myself. But if I could only have that, then the turn comes at the end when he realizes I'd rather be the type of person that doesn't get fulfillment in those things, but rather in the moment of my mind, and relish how my mind is capable of understanding something much greater than a temporal kind of fame or a temporal kind of satisfaction. That in the end doesn't really carry on but beyond death. I mean, there are authors that have written shitloads of books and stories, and we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
We forget. Well, we don't forget Shakespeare. We don't forget Aeschylus. We don't forget the really greats. Some of these other authors, you might remember 1 or 2 things that they would, 2, 3 things that they've written. But Shakespeare, Keats, you have every one of their fucking things that they've written offers you something great that enriches your life. And I think that's what this poem is about. Contrasting Fair Creature of an Hour, the fairy power, the high romance, the magic hand of chance, with something of much more substance than that. The contrast. Try one more time, and then we'll go on to Joanne.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about it later or something. I did a little bit of looking into when it was written and stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently it was, this was sent in a letter to a friend in 1818, which was the I think it was 1817 that he wrote Endymion. So
Yeah.
this is coming like a certain number of months after that was first published, and then his brother. This is January of 1818, and by the end of 1818, his brothers died. So of tuberculosis. So I wonder if the his brother has taken sick maybe because it's like over a period of time someone passes away from something like that, it gets worse and worse. And also 1810 is his mother passed away from tuberculosis, and apparently he nursed her while she sort of passed away.
Right.
And so if he saw the signs of that in his brother, and apparently from one of the biographies I read, short biography, it was something that he was concerned about himself, that he thought maybe like his mother, that would be what would take his life, which in the end it did.
Yeah.
So he sort of has all this going on, and I think, like you mentioned, this love he had for Fanny was beginning around this time as well. So.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So he had a lot of reasons to fantasize a different outcome for his life that would be sense perceptually much more satisfying. I could marry Fanny, we can have children, I can write books, I can teach at Cambridge or whatever the fuck, That if I don't have that, what is it that's going to fulfill me without those things? And it is the giving value to that kind of fantasy, a fantasy that is not based in reality. Better to just write my poems while I'm alive. Better to just try to write the highest quality stuff that I can. And when I die, is when I die. This separates me from everybody else, just about. The rest of mankind does not think that way. They still don't. They never have. Most mankind or most people are always considering, how am I going to fulfill myself today? I mean, who sits down to write a poem these days? Who sits down to write music? Or just for the sheer enrichment of the soul sits down to read Shakespeare? Very few. Very, very few. I think that's what this poem is about.
Hmm.
Want to try it one more time?
Sure.
It was cool with this. As long as they're logical, they're fine.
Yeah, I'm sort of changing them, but as long as I change them to a logical place.
Yes.
Yeah. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and know that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love. Then, on the shore of the wide world, I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink.
Much better. Much better. Now I'm really following the subtext. Now I'm really following the subtext. And so, what happens is that time is irrelevant. When you can take these thoughts and unfold them as you have come to understand them. There's no such thing as time. There's no such thing as time as most people think of it, with it beginning, counted in seconds or minutes or whatever. It's totally suspended while these thoughts are unfolding. If it's done competently. So, Bo, you have said, and know that I may never live to trace instead of and think that I may never live to trace. I think that's the word where you've been substituting know instead of think. And think that I may never live to trace their shadow. So, the great thing, Brian, is that once you understand this concept of logical phrasing points, instead of a more rigid idea, then you have much more flexibility, and that's what I'm getting from you, especially this last go. There was much more flexibility in expressing the idea. So when you review this, you'll see how far you came. And the cadence was much more satisfying.
Yeah, I think also trying to keep it almost to myself with the way I was speaking it. I could catch myself just going higher in my registration, or just sort of beginning to almost push my voice, and then when I could feel that, I could say, okay, it's slipping away almost. Let's sort of get a handle of the reins again and not let it sort of go, just
Bring it
go.
Back.
Yeah.
Bring it back. That's right. That's why you have to be audience and performer. If you can satisfy the audience in you, then you stand a good chance of satisfying anybody else that might be listening. So good, man. Very good.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love this sonnet. It's such a beautiful sonnet.
Yeah, it is. It is, and I want to try to find that letter. If he sent a letter to his... Joanne's got a book of his letters, and I'm thinking maybe if he sent this in a letter to his friend, maybe there's something there. He talks about what's going on, I think it's interesting to connect.
I have a really good biography of his, which I'll
Get me.
it's downstairs right now, but
Okay.
I can give it to you next time we work.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay.